Picture standing at the edge of a weathered stone bridge, its arches worn smooth by centuries of footsteps. Beneath you, a river whispers secrets of the past of kings who crossed here with armies at their backs, of merchants hauling silks and spices to distant markets, of travelers carrying ideas that would reshape the world. This isn't just a bridge, it's a time machine, and scattered across Europe and beyond, these ancient pathways tell a story far grander than the stones that built them. They were the hidden networks of power, the threads that stitched together kingdoms during the so-called Dark Ages, when the fate of empires often hinged on who controlled these vital lifelines. What if I told you that some of these roads and bridges were so ingeniously designed they're still in use today, or that a single forgotten trade route could determine the rise and fall of a dynasty? The Dark Ages weren't just a time of chaos and decline. They were an era of astonishing engineering, where visionaries built structures meant to last millennia. Think about that for a moment. While kingdoms rose and fell, while wars raged and plagues swept the land, these bridges and roads endured. They carried not just people and goods, but the very flow of history itself. And yet, so many of their stories have faded into obscurity, buried under layers of myth and time. That's why we're setting out on this journey together, to uncover the truth behind 25 of these ancient marvels. From the shadowy forests of Germania to the sun-baked hills of Andalusia, we'll walk in the footsteps of pilgrims, conquerors, and everyday folk who relied on these paths to survive. We'll discover how a bridge could spark a rebellion, how a road might decide the outcome of a war, and how these structures became silent witnesses to humanity's unshakable drive to connect, explore, and endure. By the time we're done, you'll never look at a crumbling stone arch or an overgrown dirt path the same way again, because these aren't just relics of the past. They're the foundations of our modern world, and their legacy is all around us if you know where to look. To truly grasp how vital these ancient roads and bridges were, we have to step into the mindset of a medieval traveler. Imagine setting out from Paris to Rome, not with a GPS or paved highways, but along dirt paths etched into the landscape by generations of footsteps. Every river crossing was a gamble. Would the wooden bridge be sturdy, or would you need to ford the current with your ox cart? These journeys weren't just inconveniences, they were feats of endurance where the right infrastructure meant the difference between life and death. That's why rulers poured resources into maintaining these routes. A well-built bridge wasn't just a convenience, it was a statement. It told the world, my kingdom is strong enough to tame rivers, to carve order from wilderness. Take Charlemagne, for example. His empire stretched across much of Europe, but without the Roman roads he repaired and the new bridges he commissioned, controlling such vast territories would have been impossible. Messengers carrying decrees, soldiers marching to defend borders, taxes flowing back to the treasury, all depended on these arteries of stone and earth. And it wasn't just about control. These pathways became cultural lifelines. The pilgrim trudging to Santiago de Compostela, the Venetian merchant hauling spices to London, the scholar carrying manuscripts between monasteries. Each relied on infrastructure we'd consider primitive today. Yet somehow these routes held civilizations together. What's astonishing is how little we celebrate their builders. We know the names of kings and bishops, but who remembers the anonymous masons who fitted stones without mortar so precisely their bridges still stand after 1,000 winters? Or the laborers who leveled roads through mountain passes, their tools barely more than picks and sweat. These weren't just constructions, they were acts of faith that trade would flourish, that knowledge would spread, that empires would endure. As we explore each of these 25 marvels, you'll start to see the Dark Ages in a new light, not as a time of stagnation, but as an era of quiet revolution, where humble paths paved the way for the modern world. The Roman roads were masterpieces of engineering that refused to fade into obscurity, even as the empire that built them crumbled. Picture a medieval merchant guiding his cart along the Via Appia, its massive basalt stones still perfectly aligned centuries after Roman legionnaires last marched there. That's the astonishing reality. These weren't just roads, but monuments to a civilization's ambition. The Romans didn't simply lay down paths, they sculpted the landscape itself. Their engineers built roads like layered cakes, a foundation of packed earth, then gravel, sand, and finally those iconic flat stones on top, all angled slightly to shed rainwater into drainage ditches. This wasn't construction, it was alchemy, turning dirt into something nearly eternal. What's truly remarkable is how medieval societies repurposed this ancient network without the vast Roman bureaucracy to maintain it. When a bridge collapsed, local lords might rebuild it with rougher stones. When landslides buried sections, travelers simply carved new detours around them. The mile markers became waypoints for pilgrims. The old rest stops turned into taverns or fortresses. The Via Egnatia, once Rome's highway to the east, became Byzantium's lifeline, a 1,000-mile thread connecting Constantinople to the Adriatic, carrying not just silk and spices, but Greek fire and imperial edicts. These roads were so well made they became like rivers impossible to erase from the land, only diverted or adapted. Consider the paradox. While medieval Europe forgot how to build in concrete or erect vast domes, they never lost the knowledge of maintaining these roads. Why? Because utility always outlasts empire. A farmer taking his grain to market or a monk traveling to a monastery didn't care whether the road was built by Augustus or a local duke, only that it got them where they needed to go. That's the quiet lesson of the Roman roads. They survived not because of nostalgia, but because they worked. Even as Latin faded and empires rose and fell, those stone pathways remained the skeleton upon which medieval Europe moved, traded, and communicated. The Dark Ages weren't dark along these routes, they thrummed with life, proof that great infrastructure can become immortal. The Pont Davignon stands as a testament to medieval ambition, a bridge that defied a mighty river only to be humbled by it. Picture this: 1,200 years ago, builders looked at the wild, rushing waters of the Rhone and said, "We will tame you." They didn't just construct a crossing, they created a stage. A stage where history played out in the footsteps of pilgrims shuffling toward Rome, merchants haggling over Provençal textiles, and troubadours strumming lutes beneath the arches. This was more than stone and mortar. It was a living, breathing marketplace of ideas and goods, vibrating with the energy of a continent on the move. That famous nursery rhyme, Sur le Pont d'Avignon, hides a deeper truth in its playful melody. The bridge wasn't just a place to dance, it was a marvel of its age. 22 arches stretched nearly half a mile across the river, each one a calculated defiance of nature. Medieval engineers used every trick they knew: pointed arches to distribute weight, sturdy piers anchored deep in the riverbed, and a width that allowed 2 ox carts to pass abreast. But the Rhone fought back. Flood after flood gnawed at the stone, and by the 17th century, the bridge was a ghost of itself, a jagged stump jutting into the water, its final 4 arches standing like a monument to human perseverance. What's haunting is how quickly the practical became the poetic. Long after the bridge ceased to function, it lived on in song and story. Pilgrims still came, not to cross, but to touch the weathered stones and remember. The missing arches became a metaphor for time's passage, for the futility of resisting nature, for the beauty of things left unfinished, and perhaps that's why the Pont Davignon captures our imagination so fiercely. It's not just a relic of engineering, it's a bridge between worlds, between the medieval mind that dared to build it and ours, which can't help but wonder at its stubborn fragments. Every flood-scarred stone whispers the same lesson. Even the grandest designs must bow to the river eventually. While Europe rebuilt itself after Rome's fall, another network was quietly stitching together the medieval world, one that stretched from Constantinople to the jungles of Cambodia. The Silk Road wasn't a single path but a web of trails, each pulsating with the footsteps of merchants, monks, and mercenaries. Picture a caravan emerging from the Taklamakan desert, its camels' bells muffled by sandstorms, their loads packed with Persian silver and Tang dynasty porcelain. This wasn't just trade, it was a slow-motion revolution. Every bale of silk carried hidden cargo, Buddhist sutras tucked between folds, medical knowledge exchanged over campfires, even the secret of papermaking smuggled west by captured Chinese artisans. What's startling is how this network thrived in an era we call dark. While Europe fractured, cities like Samarkand became dazzling crossroads. Its bazaars buzzed with Sogdian merchants haggling in a dozen languages. Its mosques bore Chinese-inspired tilework, and its astronomers blended Greek and Indian star charts. The Silk Road didn't just move goods, it dissolved barriers. A Nestorian Christian church might stand beside a Zoroastrian fire temple, while a Muslim scholar copied translations of Aristotle from Byzantine manuscripts. This was globalization centuries before the word existed, all powered by the relentless shuffle of feet and hooves across mountain passes. But here's the twist: the road's real genius was its fragility. Unlike Roman highways, there was no central authority maintaining it. Bandits lurked in the Pamir Mountains, tariffs changed with every emirate crossed, and caravans risked everything from avalanches to sand dunes that swallowed men whole. Yet that very chaos bred adaptability. When Mongol conquests made land routes perilous, traders shifted to the Black Sea. When plague struck, they bypassed infected cities like chess pieces. The Silk Road didn't fade because it failed. It evolved, seeding maritime routes that would later dominate. Its legacy, proof that connection is stronger than empire, and that even in the darkest ages, light travels. London Bridge didn't start as the stone behemoth we imagine today. Picture instead a fragile wooden structure swaying over the Thames, its planks blackened by fire after fire, its supports splintered by Viking axes. For centuries, this was London's lifeline, a vulnerable thread connecting two halves of a growing city, constantly rebuilt only to be destroyed again. Then in 1176, something extraordinary happened. King Henry II looked at the charred remains of yet another bridge and made a decision that would change urban history. This time, they would build in stone. The audacity of this project still takes the breath away. Medieval Londoners didn't just want a crossing, they envisioned a miniature city suspended above the river. Over 19 arches rose a teeming thoroughfare barely 4 meters wide, crammed with over 100 timber-framed buildings, shops selling Flemish wool, taverns steaming with mutton pies, even a chapel where travelers could pray before crossing. The bridge became its own ecosystem, with residents living their entire lives above the rushing Thames. But this vertical village came with quirks. Houses projected so far over the water that neighbors could shake hands across the gap, while beneath them, water wheels churned and fishermen cast nets between the narrow arches that created dangerous rapids. Why gamble on such an elaborate structure? The answer pulses through the cobbled streets leading to its approaches. London was evolving from a muddy trading post into Europe's financial heartbeat. Wool exports demanded reliable routes, while the growing guilds needed permanent marketplaces. A stone bridge wasn't just infrastructure, it was a billboard announcing London's arrival as a commercial powerhouse. The bridge's chapel even doubled as a customs house, where toll collectors skimmed taxes from every barrel of wine rolled across. What's most remarkable is how the bridge mirrored medieval society's shifting priorities. Unlike Roman roads built for armies or pilgrim paths designed for spiritual journeys, London Bridge served commerce. Its very stones whispered a new truth: money was becoming the mortar holding cities together. When fires occasionally broke out in its tightly packed buildings, merchants would rush to save their goods before helping neighbors, a telling metaphor for the age. Yet for all its chaos, the bridge worked. It stood for over 600 years, surviving everything from peasant revolts to the Great Fire, proving that medieval engineers understood something profound. A city's strength isn't just in its walls, but in its connections. The Camino de Santiago wasn't just a path, it was a river of souls flowing across medieval Europe. Picture a 12th century peasant setting out from his village in France, leather satchel slung over his shoulder, a scallop shell tied to his tunic as proof of pilgrimage. Ahead lay 800 miles of uncertainty, Pyrenean blizzards, bandits lurking in Navarre's forests, the ever-present fear of illness far from home. Yet he walked anyway, because this trail of crumbling Roman roads and mountain goat tracks promised something no castle or cathedral could: transformation. The Camino didn't merely connect geographical points, it linked the earthly to the divine, with every blister and hunger pang supposedly scrubbing sins from the soul. What's astonishing is how this spiritual highway became Europe's first great cultural melting pot. In Leon's hostels, Flemish merchants traded stories with Sicilian monks over bowls of garlic soup. Burgundian stonemasons taught Moorish-style carving techniques to local apprentices, while Jewish physicians shared medical knowledge with Christian pilgrims. The road itself became a living manuscript, its margins filled with graffiti Cyrillic prayers scratched beside Norse runes, all leading to the same silver-encrusted tomb in Compostela. Even the humble infrastructure tells a story. Romanesque bridges like Puente la Reina were designed with extra width so ox carts and pilgrims could pass side by side, while hospitals run by knightly orders offered free care to any traveler bearing the scallop shell symbol. The Camino's genius lay in its adaptability. When Muslim rule made southern routes perilous, new paths branched through estuarine hills. When crowds grew too large for existing hostels, entire towns like Santo Domingo de la Calzada sprang up around a single hermit's shelter. This wasn't top-down planning, it was organic growth fueled by desperation and devotion. A pilgrim might start his journey fearing Saracens, only to be sheltered by a Muslim family in Andalusia. A noblewoman accustomed to silk cushions would sleep shoulder to shoulder with beggars in Galician granaries. The road stripped away social hierarchies, revealing a common humanity beneath. Today's pilgrims still feel that ancient pull. Modern boots tread the same stones where medieval feet wore grooves, past 12th century milestones carved with shells and arrows. The difference: now we walk by choice, not desperation, seeking meaning rather than salvation from hellfire. Yet the essence remains unchanged, a battered guidebook replacing the medieval pilgrim's credential, albergues offering bunk beds instead of straw pallets, but still that same exhilarating mix of solitude and solidarity. The Camino endures because it answers something timeless in us: the need to step outside our lives, to be stripped down to essentials, to remember that every traveler, whether in chainmail or Gore-Tex, is just a temporary guest on this ancient, welcoming earth. The clapper bridges of Dartmouth stand as quiet rebels against the idea that progress always means complexity. Picture a single granite slab laid across a rushing stream, its surface worn smooth by centuries of shepherds' boots and sheep hooves. No arches, no decorative carvings, just raw stone doing exactly what it was meant to do. These unassuming crossings reveal a profound truth. In the harshest landscapes, survival favors simplicity. While cathedral builders obsessed over flying buttresses and kings commissioned monumental spans, rural communities perfected a design so timeless it predated Rome itself. What's fascinating isn't just their prehistoric origins, but how they defied obsolescence. Medieval farmers still used these bridges daily, their narrow slabs perfectly sized for livestock but too tight for invading armies' supply carts. The lack of mortar wasn't a limitation, it was genius. When winter floods surged, water could rush freely between the dry stacked stones instead of building pressure against rigid arches. Local masons knew something modern engineers are rediscovering. Sometimes nature works with you best when you don't try to dominate it. Walk across one today and you'll notice the subtle cleverness beneath its rugged surface. The slabs angle slightly upstream, breaking the current's force. The supporting boulders are often embedded deep in the riverbed, their weight stabilizing the structure without needing foundations. Even the positioning tells a story. These bridges rarely follow straight lines, but curve to align with ancient droveways where generations guided cattle to market. Every element speaks of intimate knowledge passed down through unlettered builders who understood their land's rhythms better than any royal surveyor. Their endurance raises an uncomfortable question for our age of steel and concrete megaprojects. Have we forgotten the art of building for permanence? While London's medieval bridge required constant repairs, some clapper bridges haven't needed maintenance in a millennium. The secret wasn't superior technology, but humility, using local materials that weathered in harmony with the environment rather than fighting against it. In a world where infrastructure projects often prioritize spectacle over sustainability, these mossy old slabs whisper a lesson we're only beginning to relearn. Sometimes the most revolutionary designs are the ones that disappear into the landscape, quietly doing their job while empires rise and fall around them. The Via Regia wasn't just a road, it was a living, breathing spine of medieval Europe, flexing with the weight of empires. Picture a caravan of Flemish wool merchants plodding eastward, their wagons creaking under bolts of cloth destined for Krakow's bustling markets. Ahead, Hungarian salt traders led mules laden with white gold toward Frankfurt's fairs, while mounted couriers galloped past carrying sealed letters between kings. This 800-mile artery pulsed with more than commerce. It thrummed with the heartbeat of a continent slowly stitching itself together after Rome's collapse. Its very name, the Royal Road, whispered its dual purpose, a channel for silks and spices, yes, but equally for armies and edicts. What made this route extraordinary wasn't its engineering. Many sections were little more than muddy ruts, but its unrivaled role as a political tool. When Holy Roman Emperor Frederick Barbarossa needed to project power into rebellious Saxony, he marched his knights down the Via Regia's worn path. When Bohemian silver mines flooded European markets with currency, it flowed along this corridor like liquid metal. Towns along the route didn't just grow, they transformed into strategic chess pieces. Leipzig, for instance, blossomed from a riverside settlement into a commercial powerhouse simply because it sat at the crossroads where the Via Regia met the north-south Amber Road. Local lords quickly learned, controlling a stretch of this highway meant pocketing a slice of continental wealth through tolls. Yet the road's true genius lay in its adaptability. Unlike Roman highways rigidly marked with milestones, the Via Regia shifted like a river delta. Floods might force detours through new villages, while war could close sections for decades only for trade to organically reroute itself, birthing fresh market towns. This fluidity created a paradox. Though kings claimed authority over the road, no single power could monopolize it. A Hanseatic merchant might pay tariffs to a Polish duke at dawn, then bargain with a Bohemian count by dusk, his goods untouched by the political squabbles around him. The legacy lingers in unexpected places. Modern highways like Germany's A4 and Poland's national Route 94 still trace the Via Regia's ancient grooves, their asphalt layered over medieval footpaths. UNESCO protects sections as a cultural heritage site, but the real monument is subtler: the way borders shifted around this route's permanence, how dialects blended in its roadside taverns, how even today, a farmer ploughing near Erfurt might still turn up a 14th century Bohemian groschen lost from some merchant's purse. Roads like this remind us that infrastructure isn't just about movement. It's about momentum, the quiet, relentless force that bends kingdoms to its will. There's something unsettling about standing beneath the soaring arch of the Pont della Madonna, its spine curving sharply against the Tuscan sky. Locals call it the Devil's Bridge, not because it's cursed, but because its perfection seemed impossible. How could mere mortals span such a chasm with stones that fit like puzzle pieces, without mortar or modern tools? The answer lies in medieval engineering, so advanced it blurred the line between skill and sorcery. These so-called Devil's Bridges, scattered across Europe from the Raketsbrück in Germany to the Pont du Diable in France, share a peculiar trait. Their construction defied contemporary understanding, leaving generations to whisper that dark forces must have lent a hand. Look closer, though, and the truth is even more fascinating. The steep hump of the Pont della Madonna wasn't just for show, it was a calculated response to flood-prone rivers. By raising the apex, builders reduced the number of vulnerable piers in the water while maintaining structural integrity. The narrower arches at the top distributed weight more efficiently, allowing the bridge to withstand centuries of rushing currents. Local stonemasons likely honed their techniques through trial and error, passing down knowledge that turned near mythical in the retelling. When a farmer saw his neighbor's crude wooden footbridge wash away while the Devil's Stone span stood firm, is it any wonder superstition filled the gaps in understanding? These legends served a hidden purpose beyond entertainment. By attributing bridges to the devil, communities absolved themselves of maintenance guilt. If Satan built it, surely he'd keep it standing, a convenient belief that preserved vital infrastructure through neglect. The tales also acted as deterrents. Parents warned children away from unstable edges by invoking hellish architects, while travelers might toss a coin into the river for the devil's toll, unknowingly funding future repairs. The irony: many bridges bearing Satan's name were likely projects of monastic orders, their anonymous brotherhoods of builder monks blending faith and physics to serve pilgrims. What's haunting is how these stories mirror medieval Europe's uneasy relationship with innovation. In an age where cathedrals rose skyward through collective devotion, bridges equally miraculous but less sacred needed alternative mythologies. The devil became the patron saint of impossible engineering, a shadowy figure who could explain both the bridge's existence and the eerie perfection that made villagers uneasy. Today, as engineers use lasers to study the mortarless joints of these spans, they're not uncovering dark magic, just the fingerprints of forgotten masters who understood stone's secrets better than we ever will. The real devilry wasn't in the construction, but in the way these builders made the impossible look effortless, leaving us to wonder if genius and witchcraft might just be two sides of the same coin. Imagine waking up in 14th century Lübeck to the sound of wagon wheels clattering over cobblestones, the air thick with the scent of Baltic herring and freshly hewn timber. This wasn't just another morning, it was the heartbeat of a commercial empire. The Hanseatic League didn't conquer with swords, but with ledgers and trade routes stretching from Novgorod's icy markets to London's bustling wharves. What made this merchant guild extraordinary wasn't just their monopoly on Northern Europe's goods, but their mastery of something far more mundane yet revolutionary: dirt roads. While we picture Hanseatic cogs laden with Flemish wool and Russian wax braving stormy seas, their overland routes were equally vital. Teams of oxen dragged sledges loaded with Rhenish wine along the Hellweg, an ancient path hardened by centuries of traffic into a natural highway. In winter, when Baltic ports froze solid, these trails became lifelines, snow-packed and slick, but reliably open. The League's genius was recognizing that controlling trade meant controlling infrastructure. They didn't just build warehouses, they financed stone bridges over the Elbe, maintained way stations where drivers could swap exhausted horses, and even bribed local lords to lower tolls. This wasn't charity, it was cold calculation. Every smoothed rut and repaired ferry landing meant faster turnover, bigger profits, and tighter dominance over competitors. The real innovation, though, lay in standardization. For the first time since Rome's fall, goods moved under uniform rules. A barrel of salted herring packed in Scania had to match exact dimensions whether it was headed to Bergen or Bruges. Roadside inns displayed the League's eagle crest, signaling safe lodgings where accounts could be settled using a common system of weights and measures. This network of trust transformed jerky cart tracks into what we'd now call a supply chain. When a Danzig merchant received word of a flax shortage in Flanders, he could dispatch wagons within hours, confident the cargo would arrive unspoiled and fetch top price. But the League's routes did more than move goods, they moved ideas. Brick Gothic architecture spread from Lübeck to 100 Baltic towns because the same carts carrying Prussian grain also bore master masons and their design templates. The first international postal service emerged when Hanseatic merchants realized news of a storm-wrecked ship or a political coup could mean the difference between profit and ruin. Even language evolved. A pidgin called Hanseatic Low German became the medieval equivalent of business English, peppered with terms like contour for trading post and staple for mandatory market stops. What finally unraveled this web wasn't competition, but its own success. As the League grew richer, their roads became too well-traveled. Ruts deepened into mud pits during rains, while newer kingdoms like Muscovy built competing routes. The death knell came when Dutch ships began bypassing Hanseatic middlemen entirely, sailing directly to Baltic ports. Yet walk through Tallinn's old town today, past the guild halls with their stepped gables and cavernous cellars, and you'll sense the ghost of that network. In the unusually wide medieval streets designed for turning wagons, in the surviving fragments of the Stecknitz Canal, Europe's first artificial waterway built expressly for commerce. The Hanseatic League proved something radical for its time. That wealth could be woven not just from gold coins, but from the very ground beneath our feet. High in the Andes, where thin air starves lungs and jagged peaks defy passage, the Inca Empire performed an engineering miracle that would leave European road builders speechless. While knights clashed in muddy fields and plague-ridden cities crumbled, indigenous engineers wove 25,000 miles of roads through some of Earth's most punishing terrain, all without iron tools, written language, or even the wheel. This wasn't just infrastructure, it was a love letter to resilience, etched into mountainsides with nothing but stone hammers and human ingenuity. What makes the Quhapak Nyan, the Royal Road, so astonishing isn't just its scale, but how it laughs in the face of geography. Imagine a highway system where one branch scales 15,000 foot, passes in the Andes, while another snakes through coastal deserts so dry they make the Sahara seem lush. The Incas didn't conquer nature, they danced with it. where cliffs plunged into abysses, they built suspension bridges from woven grass ropes, strong enough to support marching armies yet flexible enough to sway with earthquakes. In swamps, they laid causeways of crushed stone that still resist sinking after 5 centuries, and all along the route, tambos way stations stocked with food, weapons, and emergency supplies spaced a day's walk apart, creating the ancient world's most sophisticated rest stop network. The secret weapon, adaptation. Unlike Roman roads that followed rigid straight lines, the causeways embraced the land's contours like a tailor-fitting cloth. Engineers used different techniques for each ecosystem: paved flagstones in rainy highlands to prevent erosion, compacted earth in arid zones to minimize dust, even staircases carved into living rock where slopes grew treacherous. This wasn't just practical, it was philosophical. To the Incas, roads weren't merely transportation. They were physical manifestations of their worldview, connecting not just places but sacred huacas shrines and celestial observation points. A messenger running these routes wasn't just carrying mail, he was tracing the empire's spiritual skeleton. Consider the chasqui runners, the empire's human telegraph system. Stationed every 4 miles along the road, these athletes could relay a message from Quito to Cusco, a distance equal to New York to Chicago, in under a week. Without horses or wheels, they relied on sheer athleticism and a relay system so precise that fresh runners would burst into a sprint as their predecessor came within earshot, passing information orally without breaking stride. It was a logistical ballet, one that allowed the Inca to govern an empire larger than any European kingdom of the time. The real tragedy: we'll never know the full scope of their brilliance. Spanish chroniclers, dazzled by gold temples, barely documented the roads that made the empire function. Many bridges were deliberately destroyed during conquest to cripple resistance, while others succumbed to time. Yet fragments endure: a mossy staircase here, a rope bridge still rebuilt by villagers using traditional methods, there whispering secrets of an engineering tradition that viewed roads not as conquerors' tools, but as threads in a living tapestry. In a world obsessed with speed and scale, the causeways offers a quiet counterpoint. True progress isn't about dominating landscapes, but learning to move through them with grace. The medieval London Bridge wasn't just a way to cross the Thames. It was a teeming vertical village where life unfolded in 3 dimensions. Picture this: 19 stone arches, each crammed with multi-story houses jutting out over the water like a precarious game of Jenga. The bridge wasn't merely built, it grew organically. Its buildings added haphazardly over time until the structure groaned under the weight of human ambition. At its peak, over 200 shops and residences clung to the span, their upper floors leaning so close together that neighbors could pass a loaf of bread across the gap. This was urban density taken to its extreme, a precursor to modern skyscrapers, but built with timber beams and sheer necessity. Why would anyone choose to live suspended above rushing currents? The answer lies in medieval London's explosive growth. As trade boomed following the Norman conquest, the city's walls became a suffocating corset. Every square foot of dry land was claimed by guilds, monasteries, or noble households, leaving the middle class to get creative. The bridge offered prime real estate. Shopkeepers could catch customers coming and going, while residents enjoyed a prestigious address with built-in security. The fortified gates at either end made it easier to defend than most city streets. The bridge even had its own chapel dedicated to St. Thomas Becket, complete with a crypt where travelers could seek blessings before crossing for a small donation, of course. But this vertical city came with quirks that would make modern engineers blanch. The narrow arches acted like a funnel, creating deadly rapids during tidal surges so violent they became a tourist attraction called shooting the bridge. Boats attempting passage had to lower their masts and time the tides perfectly, while reckless watermen who misjudged the currents often ended up smashed against the starlings, the protective wooden barriers around each pier. The bridge's famous nursery rhyme, "London Bridge is falling down," wasn't just playful fantasy. Fires, ice flows, and structural collapses were constant threats. In 1282, 5 of the bridge's houses tumbled into the Thames during a winter storm, yet reconstruction began before the debris settled. The bridge's true genius lay in its economic ecosystem. Every inch served multiple purposes. Water wheels beneath the shops harnessed tidal energy to grind grain, while the gaps between buildings became impromptu market stalls. The roadway itself was a study in controlled chaos, just 4 meters wide. It forced pedestrians to dodge carts, livestock, and the occasional royal procession. Wealthier residents built private latrines that emptied directly into the river below, while communal cesspits at either end became accidental social hubs where news and gossip flowed as freely as the waste. This wasn't just infrastructure, it was medieval multitasking at its most inventive. What's remarkable is how the bridge mirrored London's transformation from walled enclave to commercial powerhouse. The stone used to rebuild it after the 1176 fire came from the same Kentish quarries supplying the Tower of London, a symbolic overlap of military and mercantile ambitions. When King John authorized the first rental contracts for bridge properties in 1209, he wasn't just monetizing real estate, he was acknowledging that commerce, not nobility, would drive the city's future. The bridge became a physical ledger of urban growth, its rental income meticulously recorded to fund maintenance, an early example of public-private partnership. The legacy lingers in unexpected ways. Modern London's skyline of stacked apartments and mixed-use developments owes more to the medieval bridge's layered living than we realize. Even today's urban challenges, gentrification, infrastructure decay, the tension between public access and private profit, were all present in microcosm on those 19 arches. When the bridge was finally dismantled in the 1830s, it wasn't due to structural failure but changing tastes, the Victorians preferring wide, unobstructed spans that moved people efficiently rather than creating communities. Yet for 6 centuries, that crammed, creaking, gloriously impractical structure proved something profound. Cities aren't just about moving from point A to B, but about the messy, vibrant life that happens in between. The fens of medieval England weren't just wetlands, they were a liquid labyrinth where land and water waged an endless tug of war. Picture a lone salt merchant guiding his mule along a narrow earthen path, the reeds whispering on either side while dark water laps hungrily at the causeway's edges. This was no ordinary road. Built layer by laborious layer, these raised causeways represented something extraordinary: humanity's stubborn refusal to be hemmed in by geography. What made these boggy trails revolutionary wasn't their grandeur, but their adaptability. Unlike Roman roads that conquered landscapes with rigid geometry, fenland causeways worked with the water's rhythms. Builders used whatever materials lay at hand: bundles of brushwood to stabilize the soggy ground, planks of oak to reinforce critical sections, even discarded animal bones mixed into the earth for drainage. Some stretched for miles like slender fingers across the marshes, connecting island villages that would otherwise have been isolated for half the year. The Vikings, when they raided these lands, reportedly followed these very causeways like breadcrumbs, a testament to their reliability, even under foreign boots. The real magic lay in their communal nature. Unlike bridges commissioned by kings, these pathways were often built through collective effort. Villagers would gather after harvest to add new layers of compacted earth, knowing their survival depended on maintaining these fragile lifelines. Over generations, the causeways grew taller, not by design but necessity, as each repair added another stratum like rings in a tree. Archaeologists have found some with 15 distinct layers, each representing a community's determination to stay connected despite the rising waters. But these roads did more than move people, they shaped cultures. Fenlanders developed a distinct identity tied to their amphibious world, where children learned to read water currents like others read road signs. The causeways became social spaces too, places to exchange news, settle disputes, or court a sweetheart from the next village. Local dialects even developed unique words like droves for the wider causeways where livestock could be driven to market, a term still etched into modern Fenland place names. The ultimate test came each winter when storms transformed the Fens into a shallow sea. Yet year after year, the causeways endured, not because they were indestructible, but because the people who built them refused to surrender. When floods washed away sections, they rebuilt them slightly higher. When tides shifted channels, they adjusted routes accordingly. This wasn't just engineering, it was a dialogue with nature, one where humans proved they could adapt without dominating. Today, many of these medieval causeways still lie beneath modern roads, their layered history invisible to passing cars. But in places like the Norfolk Fens, fragments survive as walking trails where you can stand on the same compacted earth that once bore the weight of wool carts and pilgrims' feet. They remind us that infrastructure isn't always about monumental arches or precision-cut stones. Sometimes the most enduring triumphs are the ones that simply refuse to disappear, one layer of dirt and determination at a time. The Pont Saint Benes, it didn't start as stone, it began with a vision. According to legend, a young shepherd named Benes, it heard celestial voices commanding him to build a bridge across the treacherous Rhone at Avignon. No one believed him, of course. Why would they? The river was a monster, swallowing boats whole during floods and shifting its course unpredictably. But when the boy miraculously lifted a boulder that 12 grown men couldn't budge, even skeptics saw divine fingerprints. What rose from that moment wasn't just a bridge, but a testament to how medieval minds blurred the lines between engineering and the miraculous. Walking the 4 surviving arches today, you can still feel that sacred charge. The Chapel of St. Nicholas, perched midway across the span, wasn't merely a rest stop, it was a spiritual airlock. Pilgrims would pause there to shed worldly worries before stepping onto the opposite bank, symbolically crossing from the mundane to the holy. The bridge's very design reinforced this. Its slight bend wasn't an architectural error, but a deliberate curve toward the heavenly Jerusalem, forcing travelers to consciously alter their path. Even the construction process became an act of collective penance. Chronicles describe nobles and peasants laboring side by side, hauling stones as acts of devotion, their sweat and blisters transformed into spiritual currency. But why bridges? Rivers had always been thresholds in the medieval imagination, boundaries between safety and danger, the known and the unknown. Ferries were expensive and unreliable, fords could drown the unwary, and every crossing carried echoes of biblical passages. The Israelites fleeing through the Red Sea, Christ walking on water. A sturdy bridge didn't just conquer nature, it offered a controlled encounter with the sacred. The Pont Saint Benes, its chapel, even housed relics, fragments of saints' bones embedded in the walls, turning each stone into a talisman against the river's caprice. The bridge's gradual collapse only deepened its mystique. When floods claimed arches in the 17th century, locals didn't see failure, they saw providence. The remaining fragment became a pilgrimage site itself, its incompleteness a metaphor for human striving. Modern engineers later discovered the ruins hid ingenious adaptations. The pier's star-shaped cutwaters reduced flood resistance, while the chapel's position marked the safest crossing point identified by generations of fishermen. What seemed like holy guidance was often distilled local knowledge, sanctified by time. Now immortalized in the song Sur le Pont Davignon, the bridge endures as a paradox, both a feat of medieval pragmatism and a vessel for transcendence. Today's visitors still pause at the chapel's threshold, not to pray for safe passage, but to touch the same stones that once connected two worlds, the physical and the divine, the earthbound and the extraordinary. In that space between riverbanks, the medieval world found its perfect symbol, not a barrier, but a crossing place where heaven and earth could meet. The Amber Road wasn't just a path for trade, it was a river of sunlight frozen in stone, flowing southward from the Baltic shores where waves spat golden nuggets of amber onto the sand. Picture a Viking trader haggling with a Roman merchant in Carnuntum, the resinous treasure glowing between them like captured daylight. This wasn't mere commerce, it was alchemy, turning fossilized tree sap into a currency that could buy alliances, fund armies, and even heal the sick. From the misty coasts of Prussia to the sun-drenched piazzas of Venice, this network of trails and riverways became Northern Europe's silent economic engine, stitching together worlds that otherwise might never have met. What made amber so irresistible? The answer lies in its duality, part jewel, part medicine, and wholly magical to medieval minds. Baltic amber fetched higher prices than gold in Mediterranean markets because it wasn't just decorative. Roman physicians powdered it for elixirs to treat everything from gout to madness, while Byzantine emperors commissioned entire rooms paneled with amber mosaics to showcase their wealth. The church coveted it too, crafting rosary beads that warmed to the touch, as if infused with divine energy. But here's the twist, the people harvesting it along the Baltic coast often valued it least. To them, amber was just driftwood's glittering afterthought until they learned what southerners would pay for it. The road itself adapted to the whims of politics and geology. In wet seasons, traders followed river valleys where shallow drafted boats could carry heavier loads. Winter froze the marshes, allowing sledges to glide overland on ice roads marked by notched trees. Everywhere, middlemen thrived. In Wroclaw, Slavic merchants traded furs for amber before selling both to German wholesalers. In Aquileia, Venetian glassmakers discovered that melting amber with sand produced a luminous glaze no competitor could replicate. The road didn't just transport goods, it incubated innovation at every crossroads. Cultural exchange flowed both ways. Germanic tribes acquired Roman glassware and olive oil, while Mediterranean artisans copied northern animal motifs in their designs. Even language bears traces of these encounters. The Old English word for amber, glare, shares roots with the Lithuanian gintaras, proof of centuries of shared vocabulary around campfires. But the road's true legacy was its role as Europe's first luxury supply chain. When a Byzantine bride wore an amber necklace at her wedding, she wasn't just adorning herself, she was wearing the labor of Baltic divers who braved icy waters, the sweat of pack-horse drivers crossing the Carpathians, and the shrewdness of Jewish merchants who navigated a dozen currencies between source and destination. Today, fragments of the amber road linger in unexpected places. Modern highways like Poland's national route one still trace its ancient grooves, while museum cases display Roman figurines carved from Baltic amber, their surfaces still sticky with resin after 2 millennia. The real monument, though, is subtler. The way a single commodity could dissolve barriers between pagan and Christian, tribal and imperial, proving that even in the Dark Ages, beauty was a universal language. The next time you hold a piece of amber to the light, remember, you're not just seeing fossilized resin, but the ghost of a road that once lit up the medieval world. The most powerful weapon in a medieval general's arsenal wasn't his sword or siege engine, it was a bridge that vanished after use. Picture a moonlit river where Viking longships suddenly lashed together, their decks bristling with warriors as wooden planks slammed down to form an instant crossing. By dawn, the bridge is gone, leaving only trampled grass and a stunned enemy scrambling to respond. These were the pontoon bridges of the Middle Ages, fleeting, flexible, and devastatingly effective. Unlike stone spans that took years to build, these floating pathways could materialize overnight, turning rivers from obstacles into opportunities. What made them so revolutionary? Speed and surprise. When Charlemagne marched against the Saxons, his engineers carried prefabricated bridge sections on wagons, medieval flat-pack furniture designed for rapid assembly. The Vikings took it further, using their ships as modular pontoons. A single longship could become part of a bridge in the morning, then sail upstream to repeat the trick elsewhere by afternoon. This mobility allowed armies to outmaneuver defenders who'd relied on natural waterways as defensive barriers. Castle garrisons might boast about their moats, but against an enemy who brought their own bridges, those moats became mere puddles. The real genius lay in their simplicity. A typical pontoon bridge required no nails or complex joinery, just ropes to lash boats together and planks laid across their gunwales. Some armies even used inflated animal skins as floats when boats were scarce. The Mongols perfected this art during their European campaigns, crossing the Danube on bridges made of felt-covered rafts that could be dismantled and carried onward. These weren't elegant structures, but they didn't need to be. Their only job was to last long enough for horses, men, and siege equipment to cross. After that, burn the planks, scatter the boats, and leave no trace for pursuing forces. Consider the psychological impact. Defenders watching from riverbanks didn't just see a bridge forming, they witnessed geography itself being rewritten before their eyes. Rivers that had served as natural borders for generations suddenly became meaningless. The sight of an army materializing where no crossing should exist shattered morale as effectively as any battering ram. At the Battle of Grunwald in 1410, Teutonic knights panicked when Polish-Lithuanian forces threw 3 pontoon bridges across the Maroska River simultaneously, flanking their carefully prepared positions. Yet these bridges had vulnerabilities. Currents could tear them apart if not properly anchored. Enemy fire arrows turned wooden decks into death traps. And their temporary nature meant they couldn't support prolonged use, a lesson William the Conqueror learned when his prefabricated Norman bridge collapsed under the strain of thousands crossing the Seine. But when they worked, they transformed warfare. The ability to cross rivers at will allowed armies to strike deep into enemy territory, resupply besieging forces, or escape encirclement. In an era where most battles were decided by who controlled the landscape, pontoon bridges gave commanders the ultimate cheat code. They could redesign the map itself. What's astonishing is how little these tactical marvels were celebrated. While chroniclers lavished attention on sword swings and cavalry charges, the humble pontoon bridge rarely earned more than a passing mention. Yet without them, some of history's greatest campaigns would have stalled at the first riverbank. Next time you see a modern military deploying a Bailey bridge or engineers laying floating spans across a flood zone, remember, they're heirs to a medieval tradition where the most brilliant strategies weren't just about moving troops, but moving the very ground beneath their feet. The Cistercian monks didn't just pray for a better world, they built it with their bare hands. Picture a team of white-robed figures swinging pickaxes in the drizzle, their calloused palms shaping not just a dirt path, but the very arteries of medieval commerce. While kings waged wars and nobles schemed, this monastic order became Europe's unsung civil engineers, weaving a web of roads so efficient it put many royal highways to shame. Their motivation wasn't profit or power, but something far more radical, the belief that isolation could only be achieved through connection. Here's the paradox at the heart of their mission. These monks sought solitude, fleeing the corruption of cities to establish remote abbeys in forests and marshes. Yet to maintain their austere lifestyle, they needed reliable supply lines: stone for their churches, wool for their habits, iron for their tools. So they became masters of infrastructure, turning ox tracks into paved thoroughfares and swampy trails into graveled causeways. The road between Clairvaux and Pontigny, for example, wasn't just a dirt path but a carefully engineered route with drainage ditches and reinforced fords, allowing carts laden with Burgundian wine to reach their cellars year-round. Their techniques were remarkably advanced. Cistercians preferred gentle gradients over steep inclines, designing switchbacks that spared both draft animals and wagon axles. They pioneered the use of local materials: crushed limestone in one region, compacted flint in another, adapting to geology with the pragmatism of men who saw labor as prayer. Most strikingly, they built for permanence. Where feudal lords patched roads haphazardly, the monks maintained meticulous records of repairs, treating each mile as a sacred trust. A 12th century ledger from Fountains Abbey details exact loads of gravel needed per league, proving they approached road building with the same precision as their illuminated manuscripts. But these routes did more than carry barley and wool. They became conduits for ideas. Cistercian abbeys functioned as medieval data centers, where news from Lisbon to Kiev flowed alongside sacks of grain. When the monks at Morimond needed architectural advice for a new chapel, they didn't wait for wandering masons. They consulted blueprints carted from their sister abbey in Germany. Their road network even birthed early standardization. Wagon axles made at one monastery fit the rutted tracks of another 300 miles away, a medieval version of compatible hardware. The ultimate testament to their vision, how these roads outlasted the monasteries themselves. When Henry VIII dissolved England's abbeys, many assumed the routes would fade into obscurity. Instead, local communities kept maintaining them, recognizing good engineering when they saw it. Today, if you drive through rural France or Yorkshire, you might be tracing the ghostly imprint of Cistercian roads, now paved with asphalt but still following those same carefully surveyed paths. The monks would have appreciated the irony. The roads built to serve their retreat from the world ultimately bound it closer together, proving that sometimes the holiest work doesn't happen in cloisters, but in the mud and sweat of a construction site. When the last Roman legions sailed away from Britain's shores in the early 5th century, they left behind more than crumbling villas and abandoned bathhouses. They left a skeleton. A vast network of roads, once meticulously maintained to move armies and imperial couriers, now lay exposed to the elements and the slow creep of wilderness. But here's the twist: those roads didn't die, they transformed. Without engineers or central authority, local communities began repurposing these stone arteries in ways Rome never imagined, turning imperial infrastructure into the lifeblood of a fractured world. Take Watling Street, the mighty highway that once linked Dover to Wroxeter. Where legionaries had once marched in perfect formation, now cattle plodded in dusty herds, driven by farmers to seasonal markets. The road's original curbstones, designed to channel rainwater, became makeshift pens during overnight stops. In places, the paving stones were pried up not for salvage, but to widen the path. Oxen needed more room than Roman infantry. This wasn't neglect, it was pragmatic adaptation. The same roads built to conquer Britain now sustained it, their purpose rewritten by the people who inherited them. The real ingenuity lay in maintenance. Without Rome's bureaucratic machine, repairs became communal acts. Villagers living near key crossings formed ad hoc road guilds, pooling labor to fix flood-damaged sections in exchange for tolls from passing merchants. Archaeologists have found stretches where Roman foundation layers were patched with everything from broken pottery to animal bones, whatever could stabilize the surface when proper gravel wasn't available. At Blackpool Bridge in the West Midlands, someone even repurposed a shattered Roman milestone as a stepping stone across a muddy patch, inscribing new distance markers in Old English beside the fading Latin numerals. These roads also became cultural palimpsests, where Roman surveyors had aligned routes to military camps. Medieval travelers redirected them toward emerging power centers like Canterbury or Winchester. Ancient roadside temples to Mithras became Christian shrines, then way stations for pilgrims. The very language of the roads shifted too. What Romans called Iter became the Old English strat, a word still echoing in modern street names like Stratford, ford on the paved road. This linguistic survival hints at something profound. Even as empires rise and fall, the paths they build often outlast them, accumulating new meanings like layers of sediment. What can these hybrid roads teach us about resilience? First, that great infrastructure is never truly abandoned, only repurposed. Second, that survival often depends on letting go of original intentions. Post-Roman British didn't try to maintain imperial highways as they were. They stripped them down to their essential function, connection. When a Saxon trader used a crumbling section of Ermine Street to haul salt from Lincolnshire to London, he wasn't preserving Rome's legacy. He was proving that roads belong not to their builders, but to those who walk them. Perhaps the most poignant evidence lies beneath modern motorways. When engineers excavated the route for the A2 road in Kent, they discovered medieval wheel ruts sunk deep into the original Roman foundations, proof that 16 centuries of carts, from imperial supply wagons to peasant hay carts, had followed the exact same line. The message is clear: civilizations may collapse, but the need to move, trade, and connect endures. Those grooves in the stone aren't just scars of decay, they're the fingerprints of persistence. The medieval world ran on salt not just as a seasoning, but as the invisible scaffolding holding societies together. Picture a 12th century Bavarian salt merchant leading his mule train along the old salt road, each animal's back laden with bricks of white gold wrapped in coarse cloth. In an era before refrigeration, this humble mineral meant the difference between a winter of plenty and starvation. A single pound of salt could preserve an entire deer carcass, turn cabbage into sauerkraut that lasted for months, or cure enough fish to feed a coastal village through lean seasons. No wonder salt routes like Germany's Alt-Salzstrasse or Poland's via Celeria became medieval superhighways, their ruts worn deep by the endless shuffle of hooves and cartwheels. What's astonishing isn't just salt's value, but how it reshaped geography. Towns like Lüneburg in northern Germany grew fat on salt taxes, their Gothic spires funded by brine wells that bubbled up from ancient seabeds beneath the city. The wells themselves were engineering marvels: wooden pipes drilled hundreds of feet underground to tap saline springs, with horse-drawn treadmills powering bucket chains that hauled the brine to the surface. Once evaporated in massive iron pans, the crystallized salt was pressed into cone-shaped loaves called salt hens, designed to stack neatly in wagons. These standardized units became the medieval equivalent of oil barrels, traded across continents with values carefully recorded in ledgers from Venice to Novgorod. The social impact ran even deeper. Salt routes created unexpected cultural bridges. In the Austrian Alps, miners developed a secret language called Salzburger Nappenlatin to communicate across dialects while extracting salt from the depths of Halines Mountains. Along the Camino de la Sal in Spain, Jewish merchants exempt from church prohibitions on usury controlled much of the trade. their networks stretching from Andalusian salt pans to Baltic fishing villages. And when the Hanseatic League needed leverage against rebellious coastal cities, they didn't send armies, they blocked salt shipments, knowing hunger would follow. But perhaps the most revealing aspect was salt's role in labor. The men who hauled it were medieval truckers, their lives governed by strict guild rules. On the old salt road between Lüneburg and Lübeck, carters had to complete the journey in exactly 13 days. Any faster risked damaging the cargo, any slower invited penalties. They slept in purpose-built salt inns where stables could accommodate 50 oxen at a time, and paid tolls not in coin but in salt bricks at fortified checkpoints like Ratzeburg Castle. The roads themselves adapted to the trade, sections paved with logs in swampy areas to prevent wagons from sinking, or widened where cliffs narrowed the path to a single-file death trap during storms. Today, driving through the Harz Mountains, you might spot a weathered stone marker carved with a crude sack, the medieval symbol for a salt depot. These quiet relics hint at a time when an entire economy moved at the pace of hooves on stone, when the smell of brine meant survival, and when a humble mineral could make or break kingdoms. The next time you casually sprinkle salt on your meal, remember, you're tasting the ghost of roads that built empires, one gritty crystal at a time. The boglands of medieval Ireland hid a secret beneath their spongy surfaces, a web of hidden highways built not for chariots or armies but for cattle. These were the Toggers, raised causeways painstakingly constructed from alternating layers of brushwood, stone, and gravel, their surfaces floating just above the treacherous wetlands like the spine of some submerged beast. Picture a line of farmers driving their prized cows across this narrow ribbon of stability, the animals' hooves sinking slightly into the woven branches while dark water shimmered on either side. This wasn't just infrastructure, it was a lifeline in a society where wealth wasn't counted in coins, but in livestock. What made these bog roads extraordinary was their intimate connection to Gaelic culture. Unlike Roman roads that sliced straight across landscapes with imperial indifference, Toggers followed ancient cattle drive routes worn into the land over generations. Their construction mirrored Irish social structure, communal labor organized by local kings, with each clan responsible for maintaining the section nearest their ring fort. Archaeologists have found Toggers where the brushwood layers contain offerings, antler picks left by builders, or the occasional bronze brooch pressed into the gravel, suggesting these projects were as much ritual as necessity. The roads didn't conquer the bogs, they negotiated with them, bending around sacred springs or detouring to include stepping stones carved with ogham inscriptions. Cattle were the living currency of this world. A medieval Irish law tracked the Crith Gablach, meticulously ranked kings by how many cows they owned. A lord worth 24 cows could wear a silver brooch, while a king of 3 roads needed herds large enough to support 3 major cattle drives annually. The Toggers made this economy possible. During the biannual Crete's seasonal migrations, entire communities would traverse these causeways, driving cattle between winter lowlands and summer pastures. The road's narrow width, rarely more than 2 meters, was no accident. It forced cattle into single file, allowing drovers to count and control their wealth step by precarious step. The engineering was deceptively sophisticated. Builders used birch wood for its water-resistant bark, laying the branches crosswise to distribute weight. In particularly swampy areas, they drove oak posts deep into the bog to anchor the roadbed, a technique modern engineers now recognize as an early form of pile driving. Some Toggers near monastic sites like Clonmacnoise even show evidence of rudimentary drainage systems, carefully placed gaps in the brushwood that allowed water to flow through rather than pool on the surface. But these roads were more than economic tools. They were social spaces where disputes were settled, marriages brokered, and news exchanged. The Táin Bó Cúailnge, Ireland's great epic, describes warriors racing their chariots along Toggers during cattle raids, their wheels throwing up sprays of bog water. Even the act of maintenance had cultural weight. Kings who neglected their sections risked satire by poets, a fate considered worse than battle wounds. Today, preserved Toggers like the Corlear Trackway in County Longford offer haunting glimpses into this vanished world. The oak planks, carbon dated to 148 BC, still bear tool marks from iron axes. Walk their length and you're tracing the same path where a Bronze Age drover might have paused to adjust a hobble on a stubborn heifer, where a medieval monk hurried to deliver illuminated manuscripts between monasteries, where the rhythm of hooves on wood once measured the heartbeat of a society built on beef and butter. The genius of the Toggers wasn't in their grandeur, but in their humility. They acknowledged the bog's power even as they found a way to dance across its surface, proving that sometimes the mightiest roads are the ones that barely rise above the mud. Long before backpackers set foot on the Camino, another sacred highway pulsed with the shuffle of weary sandals, the Via Francaigena, a 700-mile spine of faith winding from Canterbury's cathedral to St. Peter's Square. Picture a Saxon nobleman trudging through alpine snowdrifts in 1205, his cloak pinned with a scallop shell and his pouch heavy with letters of introduction. Every aching step brought him closer to Rome's holy gates, but the true pilgrimage wasn't just the destination, it was the transformation that happened along the way. This wasn't just a road, it was a carefully curated spiritual experience. Benedictine monks had strategically placed hospices every 15 miles, a day's walk, where blistered feet could soak in herb-infused water and souls could unburden themselves at wayside shrines. At Great St. Bernard Pass, dogs bred by Augustine monks sniffed out travelers buried in avalanches, their warm bodies reviving the half-frozen. Each stop served a dual purpose, sustaining pilgrims while reinforcing the church's reach. When a Flemish merchant donated candles to a mountain chapel, his name was recorded in a ledger that eventually reached papal eyes, turning charity into a form of spiritual networking. The genius of the Via Francaigena lay in its ability to monetize devotion. Enterprising bishops realized that pilgrims needed more than just bread and shelter, they needed validation. Certificates stamped at key shrines proved one had completed sections of the journey, much like modern passport stamps. In Lucca, worshippers could view the Volto Santo, a crucifix supposedly carved by angels, for a small donation. Siena's hospitals sold vials of miraculous dirt from Jerusalem mixed with local clay. The road became a sacred marketplace where blessings were both earned and purchased, blurring the line between piety and commerce. But the road shaped politics as much as faith. When Archbishop Sigeric traveled to Rome in 990 to receive his ceremonial pallium, he meticulously recorded each stop, creating the first known itinerary of the Via Francaigena. His list wasn't just a travelogue, it was a power map. Control these waypoints, and you controlled access to the Pope himself. Lombard kings and Norman warlords soon competed to patronize hostels along critical stretches, knowing influence over pilgrims meant influence in Rome. The road became a ladder of ambition, where every rebuilt bridge or fortified hospice was a rung toward papal favor. What's astonishing is how the route absorbed local cultures without diluting its purpose. In the Po Valley, pilgrims encountered Byzantine-style mosaics in churches funded by Venetian merchants. Swiss valleys echoed with Gregorian chants adapted into Alpine harmonies. Even the road's name shifted with the landscape, called the Frankish route in Burgundy but Romea in Tuscany, yet everyone understood its ultimate destination. This flexibility made it resilient. When floods destroyed bridges, detours led pilgrims past new shrines. When schisms divided the church, the road adapted, adding stops at rival holy sites to accommodate theological disputes. Modern walkers retracing the Via Francaigena often stumble upon subtle traces of this medieval ecosystem. A 13th century fresco in a forgotten chapel might depict a pilgrim's nightmare, bandits attacking a traveler, painted as both warning and divine test. The grooves worn into stone steps at Radicafone's fortress speak of countless staffs tapping upward toward salvation. Even the cuisine bears fingerprints of the pilgrimage. Ribollita soup, invented to reuse bread from pilgrim hostels, or the saffron-infused sweets of San Gimignano, originally made to revive famished devotees. The Via Francaigena's true legacy isn't just in the stones, but in the blueprint it created for spiritual tourism. Today's seekers walking the path with GPS guides are unknowingly reenacting an ancient ritual. The human need to measure faith in footsteps, to find meaning not just at journey's end, but in the struggle to get there. Every blister earned on those medieval cobblestones was, in its own way, a prayer. The Vikings didn't see rivers as obstacles, they saw them as invitations. Picture a dragon-headed longship gliding silently up the Seine under cover of fog, its shallow draft allowing it to ride the current like a blade slicing through silk. While medieval kings fretted over maintaining crumbling Roman roads, Norse raiders and traders were mastering an entirely different kind of infrastructure. Europe's waterways transformed into highways that carried them from the frozen fjords of Norway to the sun-baked markets of Constantinople. What made rivers so irresistible to the Vikings? Speed was only part of the story. A well-manned longship could travel 30 miles in a day, triple the pace of ox-drawn carts bogged down on muddy trails. But the real advantage lay in unpredictability. Roads followed fixed routes, easily ambushed or blocked by fortifications. Rivers, however, offered endless tactical flexibility. A raiding party could strike deep into Frankish territory, disappear into a network of tributaries, then reappear 100 miles away before defenders even realized they'd left. The Volga River became such a well-trodden Viking thoroughfare that Arab chroniclers called its traders the Rus, a name that would eventually define Russia itself. The genius of Viking riverine travel lay in their ships' adaptability. Unlike bulky Mediterranean galleys, longships were modular masterpieces. When encountering rapids or shallow stretches, crews could dismount the mast in minutes and portage their vessel overland using logs as rollers. Some longships featured removable keels taken out to navigate shallow estuaries, then reinserted for open seas. This versatility turned every river into a potential road and every coastline into a branching highway system. Trade flourished along these liquid routes in ways that would baffle land-bound merchants. A typical voyage might see Swedish Vikings loading furs and amber in Novgorod, sailing south to trade for Arab silver in Kiev, then dragging their ships overland to the Dnieper River's upper reaches before continuing to the Black Sea. Byzantine records describe Norse traders arriving with cargoes of honey, wax, and slaves, returning with silk and glassware that would eventually find its way to Dublin or York. The rivers didn't just connect places, they connected economies, cultures, and technologies across continents. But these waterways also carried darker currents. The same features that made rivers ideal for commerce, their accessibility, their reach into the heartlands, made them perfect for sudden violence. In 845, a Viking fleet sailed up the Loire to sack Nantes during a religious festival, slaughtering monks in the cathedral itself. Paris endured 3 sieges via the Seine in the 9th century, its stone bridges proving useless against ships that could simply beach upstream and attack from undefended flanks. The lesson was clear: In an era where most fortifications guarded roads, rivers became the ultimate loophole in medieval defense networks. Archaeology reveals just how deeply the Vikings imprinted themselves on these waterways. At Roskilde Fjord, the remains of salvaged longships show repeated repairs with foreign timber, oak from Ireland, pine from Norway, proving these vessels were constantly patched with whatever materials crews scavenged during their travels. Rune stones along the Dnieper commemorate traders who died in the east, while Saxon chronicles grumble about the impossibility of taxing river traffic that moved under cover of darkness. Even place names betray their influence. The suffix "by," meaning settlement, dots riverbanks from England to Russia, marking where Norse crews decided to trade their oars for plows. The ultimate testament to Viking river mastery came from their enemies. Frankish kings, humiliated by raids, eventually resorted to desperate measures, building fortified bridges like the one at Pont de l'Arche to block the Seine, or paying dangled bribes that funded further expeditions. In the east, Byzantine emperors recruited Viking mercenaries as their elite Varangian guard, valuing their naval prowess. Rivers, once seen as natural boundaries, became recognized as vulnerabilities, a lesson that would reshape medieval warfare and trade for centuries. Today, traces of these liquid highways linger in unexpected ways. Modern cargo ships still follow Viking trade routes along Russian rivers. Kayakers paddling the Loire might round a bend and find themselves staring at the same cliff faces that once reflected Norse longships' dragon prows. And in quiet museums from Uppsala to Istanbul, rusted rivets and splintered planks whisper the same truth, that the most revolutionary roads in history weren't paved with stone but carved by water, and mastered by those bold enough to ride them. The dusty roads of medieval Spain hid a secret beneath their surfaces, an engineering marvel born from the meeting of worlds. Under Moorish rule, what had been crumbling Roman highways transformed into something extraordinary. Roads designed not just for travel, but for the seamless flow of ideas across continents. Picture a caravan lumbering toward Cordoba in the 10th century, its camels laden not only with silk and spices but with manuscripts containing the works of Aristotle, preserved and expanded upon by Islamic scholars. This was Infrastructu as intellectual lifeline, where every carefully laid stone carried the weight of civilizations in conversation. What set these roads apart? The Moors brought Persian water management techniques to Iberia's arid landscapes. Their engineers lined roads with underground channels called canats that funneled mountain runoff into roadside cisterns, an innovation that kept travelers hydrated and allowed caravanserais to bloom in the desert like stone flowers. Rest stops weren't mere shelters but centers of learning, where Jewish physicians, Christian translators, and Muslim astronomers might share a meal and debate the nature of the stars. The road from Toledo to Granada became particularly famous for its houses of wisdom, where scholars gathered to copy texts under the light of oil lamps that burned late into the night. The real genius lay in how these roads facilitated knowledge transfer. When Christian armies reconquered Toledo in 1085, they didn't just capture a city, they inherited its intellectual infrastructure. The city's road network connected it to a web of libraries containing Arabic translations of Greek philosophy, Persian medical treatises, and Indian mathematical concepts. Teams of translators, often working in roadside scriptoria, laboriously transformed these works into Latin, creating a pipeline of knowledge that would fuel Europe's later Renaissance. A traveler resting at a roadside inn near Seville might overhear discussions about algebra, an Arabic word meaning reunion of broken parts, or the astrolabe perfected by Moorish astronomers for navigation. Physical remnants tell the story best. Near Medinat al-Zahra, archaeologists have uncovered sections of original Moorish pavement with subtle cambering, a slight convex curve that allowed rainwater to drain into channels rather than pooling. The spacing between way stations precisely matches a day's journey for a loaded camel, about 18 miles, demonstrating an almost scientific approach to logistics. Even the road surfaces served multiple purposes. Crushed limestone mixed with local clay created a self-healing surface that released calcium carbonate when wet, naturally filling cracks over time. Perhaps the most enduring legacy was cultural synthesis. Jewish merchants traveling these roads carried dual-language dictionaries to negotiate with both Christian and Muslim buyers. Mozarabic Christians adopted Moorish irrigation techniques for their vineyards, while Islamic architects incorporated Visigothic decorative motifs into new bridges. The road between Cordoba and Zaragoza became so renowned for its exchange of ideas that 12th century scholars called it the Street of Parables, where every mile marker seemed to prompt a new philosophical discussion. Today, walking the old Mozarabic trails, you can still find traces of this crossroads civilization, a Romanesque church with horseshoe arches borrowed from mosque design, a village bakery using Moorish oven technology, or a stretch of original pavement where the grooves of countless wagon wheels whisper of the days when roads didn't divide cultures but connected them. The lesson written in those stones is timeless. Progress rarely travels in straight lines, but along winding paths where different traditions meet, merge, and move forward together. Imagine walking across a landscape where every step sinks ankle-deep into black, watery earth, a world where solid ground is an illusion and roads must float to survive. This was the daily reality for medieval communities in the Low Countries, where ingenious builders crafted highways not of stone but of timber, laying plank upon plank across bottomless bogs. The Marsh trackways of the Netherlands and Flanders weren't just practical solutions, they were acts of defiance against geography itself, whispering secrets of resilience in their very grain. Why would anyone choose wood over stone in a world where Roman roads had proven the supremacy of rock? The answer lies in the peculiar alchemy of peatlands. Unlike firm soil that could support heavy paving, these wetlands swallowed stone whole within seasons, sucking down cobbles like quicksand, but wood, especially oak and alder, interacted differently with the acidic, oxygen-starved environment. When submerged in peat, the same conditions that decayed flesh and rusted iron instead preserved timber like a time capsule. Archaeologists have unearthed trackways where axe marks from the 9th century remain crisp as the day they were hewn, the wood darkened but uncrumbled by centuries of pressure. The engineering was deceptively simple. Builders laid parallel logs perpendicular to the path's direction, creating a stable base that distributed weight across the marsh's unstable surface. Across these, they nailed or pegged carefully split planks, often leaving narrow gaps between boards to allow water to flow through rather than pool on top. Some advanced designs featured raised edges to prevent carts from sliding off, while others incorporated notched joints that locked together without metal nails, an essential feature in regions where iron was precious. The trackways didn't fight the wetland, they collaborated with it, flexing slightly under load to avoid snapping, much like modern suspension bridges. What's astonishing isn't just their construction, but their sheer ubiquity. The small E-trackway in Friesland stretched over a kilometer, its planks wide enough for 2 ox carts to pass. At Vlaardingen, archaeologists found a complex junction where 5 trackways converged like medieval highway interchanges, complete with repaired sections showing generations of maintenance. These weren't temporary structures, some remained in use for over 200 years, their surfaces polished smooth by countless feet and wheels. Local lords even imposed tolls, with surviving records from Utrecht detailing fees for each cart with iron-rimmed wheels, proving how vital these routes were to commerce. The trackways also reveal unexpected social dimensions. At Neo-Dordrecht, a plank road built around 1250 shows deliberate detours around sacred springs, suggesting spiritual considerations influenced routing. Another in Belgium's Djurgårdsdok area was found lined with deliberately placed animal skulls, possibly offerings for safe passage. The act of construction itself became communal ritual, with dendrochronology showing some projects used trees felled in a single season, implying organized labor pools akin to barn-raising traditions. Climate's role in this story adds another layer, as the medieval warm period 900 to 1300 raised sea levels, wetlands expanded across coastal Europe. The response wasn't retreat, but innovation. Trackways grew longer, their designs adapting to deeper waters. Some incorporated bundled reeds beneath planks for extra buoyancy, while others used twisted willow branches as natural cables to stabilize floating sections. When the Little Ice Age later brought colder conditions, freezing allowed winter traffic on iced over bogs, reducing summer maintenance pressure. The roads didn't just adapt to the environment, they danced with its rhythms. Modern engineers still study these trackways for lessons in sustainable infrastructure. The Zutphen Roman IV road, preserved in situ at a Dutch museum, demonstrates principles now used in constructing boardwalks through modern wetlands, distributed weight, flexible materials, and minimal ground disturbance. There's poignant irony in realizing that medieval builders, lacking our technology, achieved something we're only now rediscovering: infrastructure that works with ecosystems rather than conquering them. Perhaps the most haunting legacy lies in the artifacts lost and found along these soggy highways. A bronze brooch dropped between planks in the year 1000 might sink slowly through peat, only to emerge perfectly preserved in an archaeologist's sieve 9 centuries later. Leather shoes, wooden toys, even seeds from roadside snacks, each object a frozen moment from a traveler's journey. These trackways didn't just carry people, they carried time itself, preserving fragments of ordinary lives that would have vanished on firmer ground. Walking the reconstructed trackway at Weerdensch today, feeling the spring of oak beneath your feet, you're tracing more than a transport route. You're following the ghostly imprint of a society that looked at impossible terrain and saw not obstacles, but opportunities where wood became more enduring than stone, and flexibility proved mightier than brute force. In an age obsessed with monumental castles and soaring cathedrals, these humble plank roads whisper a different truth, that real progress often lies not in dominating nature, but in learning to tread lightly upon it. The hollow ways of medieval Europe tell a story not written in ink but etched into the earth itself, layer by patient layer, footstep by grinding footstep. Picture a merchant leading his mule train through a corridor of exposed roots and crumbling chalk walls, the path so deep that only a sliver of sky remains visible overhead. These weren't just paths worn down by time, they were landscapes transformed by the sheer weight of human persistence, where centuries of hooves, cartwheels, and weary feet carved canyons into what was once flat ground. What's astonishing isn't just the depth. Some hollow ways in England's Cotswolds plunge over 3 meters, but how they became accidental masterpieces of passive engineering. Rainwater runoff followed these sunken trails, softening the soil just enough for the next traveler to press a little deeper, while the banks on either side grew taller and sturdier. In regions like Normandy, the underlying limestone resisted erosion sideways, forcing the paths to dig downward like natural tunnels. Over generations, these routes became self-reinforcing. The deeper they sank, the more they funneled traffic, which in turn deepened them further, a feedback loop of friction and geography. But hollow ways were more than just convenient shortcuts. They were strategic assets. During the 100 Years' War, French partisans used these sunken lanes to ambush English supply columns, their high walls hiding movements until the last moment. In Devon, local folklore tells of hedge priests leading secret Catholic masses in Holloway chapels during the Reformation, their locations obscured by the labyrinthine paths. The very design that made them efficient trade routes also made them perfect for smuggling contraband could move unseen beneath the canopy of overhanging trees, their roots now exposed like skeletal fingers gripping the earthen walls. The process of their creation reveals a hidden truth about medieval life. Repetition was the unseen architect. A single cart passing once leaves no trace. But that same cart following the same path daily for a decade, that's when the magic begins. The iron-rimmed wheels of a grain cart, loaded with a ton of barley, might press into soft soil with a force of nearly 30 pounds per square inch, enough to compact the earth beneath it millimeter by millimeter. Multiply that by thousands of trips, add centuries of rainfall washing away loose sediment, and suddenly the ordinary becomes extraordinary. Archaeologists have uncovered hollow ways with stratified layers like tree rings, dark bands of Roman-era gravel, lighter Saxon-era chalk, and even pockets of charcoal from Viking raids that temporarily diverted traffic. In Germany's Eifel region, some paths reveal grooves worn into the bedrock by wagon wheels, their precise spacing matching the standard axle widths of medieval carts. These grooves acted like railway tracks, guiding vehicles through the narrowest passages and preventing costly jams. An early example of traffic management born from pure necessity. Yet for all their practicality, hollow ways also inspired myth. British folklore speaks of shuck paths where spectral black dogs prowled, their origins likely tied to real guard dogs protecting nighttime shipments. In Tuscany, certain sunken lanes were called witches' trenches, not because of supernatural activity, but because their overgrown shadows provided cover for midwives and healers practicing forbidden medicine. The very isolation that made them eerie also made them sanctuaries for those on society's margins. Walking a hollow way today is like stepping into a living timeline. The air cools as you descend, the sound of modern traffic fading away. In places like France's Chemin Creux d'Ardevin, you can still see the notches where medieval shepherds carved footholds to climb the banks, or the occasional iron ring once used to tether oxen during rest stops. These aren't ruins, they're landscapes that absorbed human rhythm into their very bones, proving that the most enduring monuments aren't always built upward in stone, but sometimes dug downward through the quiet accumulation of everyday journeys. The lesson of the hollow ways is humbling. In an age obsessed with speed and innovation, they remind us that some of humanity's most profound marks on the world come not from grand designs, but from the cumulative weight of small, repeated actions. A peasant driving sheep to market couldn't imagine he was carving a path that would outlast kingdoms, just as we rarely consider how our own daily routines might reshape the world for those who come after. The hollow ways whisper that persistence, not just power, is what truly moves mountains, or in this case, excavates them. The lost roads of the Dark Ages whisper to us from beneath layers of soil and centuries of forgetting. Take the Eichnield Way, an ancient trackway cutting across southern England. Today, it survives only as a patchwork of footpaths and country lanes, yet its name still echoes in village signs and property boundaries, ghostly reminders of a route so old, even medieval travelers didn't know its origins. These vanished highways leave clues like breadcrumbs, a lone standing stone marking where pilgrims once paused, a parish boundary following the exact curve of a long-buried Roman road, or local legends of phantom carts heard rumbling along overgrown holloways on misty nights. Archaeologists have become detectives of disappearance, piecing together stories from seemingly mundane fragments. In the Loire Valley, aerial photography reveals faint crop marks where medieval wheat grows differently over compacted roadbeds unseen for 800 years. In Sweden, metal detectorists along the Eriksgata, the ancient kings rode still unbroken Viking-era bridle rings and horse buckles lost during royal progresses. Even something as simple as a row of ancient oak trees can betray a lost route. Medieval travelers often planted markers to guide others through trackless forests, their gnarled descendants now forming eerie straight lines across modern farmland. What determines which roads vanish and which endure? The answer often lies in economics wearing the mask of geography. Salt roads faded when refrigeration made their cargo obsolete, while pilgrimage paths like the Via Francaigena shrank as Protestant reforms dampened enthusiasm for saintly relics. Yet some disappearances defy logic. The Amber Road, once Northern Europe's glittering trade backbone, didn't so much decline as shatter. Its fragments repurposed so thoroughly that only laboratory analysis can prove Baltic amber beads found in Egyptian tombs traveled along its vanished branches. The most poignant losses are the roads that didn't so much vanish as transform. Walk through certain German forests and you might stumble upon sunken lanes, so deep their earthen walls tower overhead. These began as medieval trade routes, their surfaces worn down centimeter by centimeter until entire landscapes reconfigured around them. Farmers later avoided plowing these treacherous gullies, preserving them as accidental time capsules where the ruts of iron-rimmed wagon wheels still score the bedrock. Technology now helps us listen to these silent pathways. LiDAR scans in Ireland's Boyne Valley recently unveiled a massive ceremonial avenue linking Neolithic tombs, a road so ancient it was already mysterious when medieval chroniclers wrote of ferry paths crossing the same landscape. In Spain, ground-penetrating radar near Santiago de Compostela detected the original pilgrim road buried beneath a modern highway, its curving path deliberately avoiding now vanished marshlands that medieval travelers feared. Perhaps the greatest testament to these lost roads isn't what remains, but what they've become. The Old North Road from London to Edinburgh survives mostly as the A1 motorway, yet its medieval inns still cluster at the original one-day riding intervals. Venetian alleyways follow the exact routes of 9th-century salt haulers' tracks. Even New York's Broadway began life as a Lenape trail later paved by Dutch settlers, proof that some roads never truly disappear, they simply wear new coats. The next time you follow a country lane that suddenly curves for no apparent reason, or notice an oddly straight hedge dividing fields, you might be walking in the footsteps of merchants, monks, and messengers who shaped the world we've inherited, one footstep at a time. The stones may have weathered and the wooden planks rotted away, but the legacy of medieval bridges and roads pulses through our modern world in ways we rarely notice. Drive down the A2 in England, and you're tracing the same path Roman soldiers marched and Saxon traders later widened with their ox carts. The autobahns of Germany often follow the precise curves of ancient salt routes, where modern asphalt now covers ruts worn deep by centuries of hooves. Even flight paths above the Alps sometimes mirror medieval pilgrimage trails, proof that when humans find the most efficient route, we stick to it across millennia. Engineering marvels from the Dark Ages still teach us valuable lessons. The clapper bridges of Dartmouth, with their dry stone construction, inspire modern, unbonded bridges that flex during earthquakes rather than crack. Venice's canal-side walkways use the same elevated design principles as medieval marsh roads, keeping feet dry during aqua alta floods. And when engineers recently studied the Pont Davignon's remaining arches, they discovered the star-shaped cutwaters. Those angular projections around the piers performed better in computer flood simulations than many contemporary designs. Our ancestors may have lacked calculus and CD software, but their trial-and-error innovations often arrived at elegant solutions we're only now fully appreciating. Beyond physical infrastructure, these ancient routes shaped the very DNA of our societies. Postal routes established by Charlemagne's messengers evolved into national mail systems. Medieval trade fairs along the Champagne route birthed modern commercial laws and banking practices. The Hanseatic League's network of way stations became the blueprint for today's logistics hubs. Even our concept of time zones owes a debt to these pathways. As railroads spread in the 19th century, they standardized schedules based on medieval market towns that had long served as regional timekeepers. Perhaps the most enduring lesson lies in their democratic nature. Unlike Roman roads built primarily for armies, medieval pathways served everyone, peasant and prince alike. A pilgrim trudging to Santiago shared the same Camino with a merchant's mule train, while a king's messenger might jostle elbows with a farmer taking cheese to market. This inclusivity created something radical for its time: infrastructure as a great equalizer. Modern public transit systems and digital highways carry that same egalitarian ideal forward, proving that the most resilient networks are those that serve the many, not just the powerful few. The true test of these medieval masterpieces isn't that we still use them, but that we've unconsciously adopted their philosophies. Like the Cistercian monks who built roads to sustain their isolation, today's fiber optic cables allow both global connection and private retreat. The Viking river routes that carried both plunder and porcelain now find their parallel in container ships bearing smartphones and solar panels. Even our obsession with multi-use spaces, live work buildings, transit hubs with shopping echoes the London Bridge's vertical village where people lived, worshipped, and traded atop a thoroughfare. Standing on the worn steps of an old stone bridge, it's tempting to see these structures as charming relics, but look closer and you'll spot the unbroken thread connecting that medieval mason's chisel to the engineer's 3D printer. The materials change, the speeds increase, yet the essential truth remains. Civilizations thrive or wither based on how well they connect, not just places but people and possibilities. Those Dark Age builders understood something we sometimes forget, that every bridge is a handshake across divides, every road an invitation to discover what lies beyond the horizon. Their greatest gift wasn't the stones they laid, but the vision they embedded. That progress isn't measured in how high we build, but in how far we reach. From the Roman roads that stitched empires together to the sunken hollow ways worn deep by generations of footsteps, these 25 ancient pathways were more than mere stone and dirt. They were the silent architects of history. Every cobblestone bore witness to revolutions in trade, faith, and power. Every weathered bridge carried echoes of whispered deals and thunderous armies. What's astonishing isn't just their endurance, but how they reshaped human destiny without fanfare. The Roman Via Appia didn't merely connect cities, it spread Latin, law, and a template for conquest. The Camino de Santiago didn't just guide pilgrims, it fused cultures into a shared European identity. Even the humblest clapper bridge, built to last a few decades, outlived dynasties by centuries. Consider the ripple effects. When Charlemagne repaired crumbling Roman roads, he wasn't just fixing potholes, he was reviving a network that would carry the Carolingian Renaissance across a fractured continent. The Viking river routes, feared for their raids, became conduits for amber, furs, and even chess pieces traveling from Baghdad to Dublin, and those floating pontoon bridges. They didn't just win battles, they redefined warfare, proving that mobility could trump fortifications. These weren't passive trails but active forces, bending politics and economics to their paths. A king might claim a throne, but whoever controlled the bridges and mountain passes held the real power, yet their true legacy lives in the ordinary. The next time you wait at a traffic light, look down. That asphalt might overlay a medieval market road where farmers once haggled over grain, the highway cloverleaf near your town. Its spiral echoes the precise curves of Celtic processional paths designed for ceremonial parades, even modern logistics, overnight shipping, global supply chains, owe a debt to the Hanseatic League's standardized cart axles and way stations. The medieval world grasped something we often forget. Infrastructure isn't about the structure, but the flow of goods, ideas, and people. So here's an invitation. Walk your local streets with new eyes. Trace the ghostly imprint of old drove roads in suburban cul-de-sacs, or spot the telltale kink in a country lane where it once diverted around a long-vanished marsh. These are palimpsests, layers of history waiting to be read. And if you're lucky enough to stand on the Pont Vecchio at sunset or hike a stretch of the Via Francaigena, pause a moment. Feel the weight of centuries beneath your feet and the whispers of all who came before, merchants with spices, soldiers with swords, families with everything they owned strapped to their backs. Your turn now. Which of these ancient pathways sparks your imagination? Would you brave the Viking rivers in a longship or join the camel trains along the Silk Road? Drop your answer below. We're all travelers here, adding our own small footsteps to history's endless road. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more journeys into the past. Until next time, may your path be as storied as the ones we've walked.